So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another in the first in 2021's SCItalks. Today it's materials, the choices of a designer. I'm the chair. This is me pre-lockdown, and that's Will pre-lockdown. It's a huge honour to introduce you to Sebastian this afternoon. I've known Sebastian for about 14 years, and he's a really keen engineer. He calls himself material scientist, whatever. Although most people know him for design, what I know him for is a passionate interest in why things are the way they are, whether it's the material selection, whether it's the process you mean to make them, or increasingly, we talk about the issues of sustainability, reuse, of the circular economy, and so on. He is, as you know, knowledgeable. He's been doing this for an awful long time, despite the fact that he still looks younger than me. And you know, it's a great honor now to introduce you, Sebastian. If you want to turn on your slides, I'll turn off mine, and we can get on with the talk.
Good evening, all. I'm just going to talk to you about various things today, but it's basically the experience I've had over my lifetime as a practicing designer. I say experience because, as I understand it, experience is made of three things: sensations, emotions, and thought. This is how we experience the world. And in essence, design is the process of creatively engineering these experiences. I'm also going to share some personal experience I've had as a professional designer. I aspired to being an inventor when I was young, and in the mid-70s, I was studying industrial design at Central St Martin's. And this is the sort of what I considered the best design out there. It's a Dieter Rams cine camera, and it's basically like a lot of Dieter Rams's work. It's designing using a very tight grid, almost typographic grid, and what we would say all you need is a ruler and a radius aid, and off you go. And the first example I know of this is almost 90 years old now, that exemplifies this rather Euclidean approach to design. To my mind, it's not just good design, it's outstanding design, which is what you really need to achieve success. And as we know now, this sort of aesthetic is very much the Apple DNA, and they're a great contemporary example of this design language that defines the look of practically all its products and a lot of its interface as well. In the same way that an Audi looks like an Audi, Apple products look like their Apple products. Now, although it's deceptively simple, as I said, straight lines between circles, there's a lot more thought that goes into it than you first perceive. Those circles aren't complete circles. They, you know, they trip the eye, and they're often radiuses and ellipses to make them look like complete circles. In 1981, I was head of design at product design at Mothercare. And when I first went there, it was like walking into a chaotic camping shop. There was no consistent aesthetic to any of its products. All they had there was a Mothercare logo on them, and you know, the colours didn't match, and they looked as if they'd been designed by you know, all sorts of people. So what we aimed to do was create a cohesive and consistent look to all their products that was soft, hygienic, feminine, and dependable. We called this look soft tech. Now, we applied it successfully to all the products, but when we came to the pushchairs, which accounted for a great deal of the turnover, they're probably the most expensive things in the shop. you know, most of the customers were, of course, female. But when it came to the pushchair, we find as they had wheels, the customers tended to be male. The construction was pretty medieval by today's standards. And, you know, in those days, 95% of the merchandise in Mothercare was UK sourced. That was before the shipping container really took hold of the imports and exports. The manufacturer had just invested about £1 million in a steel chroming plant. And I walked into a meeting, my first meeting with the manufacturer, and I started talking about using structural polymers and with extruded aluminium, and basically nothing that he could make in his own plant. He was a bit flustered by this and said, but you can't use plastic. It's, you know, it's okay for toys, but it'll break. So next meeting, I turned up with a ski boot and explained actually that this is what I meant by engineering polymers. And he took it on board. And I have to say, we went on to develop one of the most successful products, or probably the most successful products he had ever made. It's called the VIA Pushchair. Got lots of awards, and it not only looked different, but it had different functions. It could take a baby straight from birth in a carry cart, and its early years it could face the parent and then face the world. It had a very large shopping tray, and it could stand up when it was folded, which, you know, it was good in the hall, but also if you're waiting for a bus or loading the back of the car, it's quite good to have a pushchair you don't have to prop up against things. Anyway, it was my first taste of professional acclaim and tangible success. I mean, it was, you know, I was the toast of Mothercare at the time. It was a classic case of integrated and desirable features leading to real benefits and a consequential, incredibly successful results. I mean, sales up 600% with greater reliability was not something that people were expecting. In fact, I think it would actually compete pretty well against today's very complicated pushchairs and large. Anyway, moving on. Here's something we've designed recently. It's a 3D printer. It uses that aesthetic that I first started using in the 70s. The challenge here was that it had to be sold as a kit. And as a kit, it had to fit in a slim box and be easy to ship through someone's letterbox, which created a bit of a challenge. So we had to use some polycarbonate sheet that you bent round, and there was fabric components where you touched them. So it was designed so that it would be a program of a journey of making over a year using sold as a part work, it's called. We've done a lot of early work on 3D printing. We've been working with the University of Sheffield. There was a challenge to design something that could only be made by 3D printing, but that would be a consumer-facing product. So our idea was to come up with a custom-made sports helmet. The logic behind it was that we all have different size, shape, and feet and heads, but you know, and when you buy shoes, you're used to this, but when you have something actually that's really quite important to function well, people have sometimes quite loose helmets, and if you're lucky, they come in 3 sizes, and they don't make any you know, depending on your head shape, it doesn't make any help with that. So not only did we do it so it fitted better, but we actually designed it so the energy absorbing cells would allow ventilation going through them in between the cells. So that worked better as well. About 25 years ago, I saw this toddler cup, and I could see it was a straightforward, what would be known as good design. In fact, I later found out it was designed by a leading design company in London, and it featured a non-spill teat invented by Mandy Hageman. Unfortunately, the cup leaked between the lid and the container because they'd used hard APS with polycarbonate, which didn't make a good seal between the body and the lid. I contacted the manufacturers mainly because I thought it looked a bit generic, and I thought, well, we could do it better. And they commissioned us to redesign it. So our redesign addressed the issue of the leakage between the lid and the body by using a polypropylene lid and polypropylene body and a polyethylene lid. And I can recall that in old Tupper's of Tupperware's fame, his patent was all about using dissimilar polymers, making a good seal. Here's another cup. This is a little cafetiere that we designed about the same time. It works extremely well. You just spoon in some ground coffee and pour in boiling water, press the plunger down, and you have a great cup of real coffee. I tried to get my father to use it, but he said, I don't like drinking coffee out of plastic. And this is something that, you know, I don't think he's alone with. But it does sell extremely well, and you know, it's been selling very well for almost 27 years now. And it, as you know, the important thing as a designer, and what our clients want, is that 5-star rating and long-term continuous sales. They'd much prefer to have one product that sold for years and years without changing than having to change it every year like your iPhone or something like that. And about a little later than that, we were commissioned to design some traditional scales, but in the modern manner. And inspired by walking on Chesil Beach in Dorset, I thought of this idea of using pebbles as weights. Now, a few years earlier, before we had CAD, it would have been extremely difficult to design and specify these forms. But with CAD, we could just fill in the specific gravity of zinc and get the exact weight, and then put them, feed them in, and send the files off digitally to our manufacturers in the Far East. This sold very well, and the John Lewis buyer, who sold an awful lot of them, and they use it in their promotional material quite a lot, they have big posters of it, said to me that she couldn't understand why it sold so well when electronic scales function so much better. And so I thought, well, of course, you know, it's fantastic design and imagination. But I stood in the corner of the shop and watched the display of these scales, and I could see people coming up to them, picking up the weights, rolling the weights around in their hand, and you could almost see the body language of a little switch going off in their head saying, I want this. So it's interesting. So it's the tactile feel as well as the personality that sells these things. And as a result of these scales, this lady, Nigella Lawson, contacted me, and she said that she would love to design a range of kitchenware, and she was very much inspired by my scales. Would I work with her? And I learned a lot from working with her. One is the need to appeal to the inner self of people, you know, the child within. Also, that cooking and eating were sensual activities. You know, we see the world, we understand the world through our senses. And so as a designer, it's important that, you know, we appeal to those, not just in the way things look and the way things feel, but the way things work. And so we endeavor, you know, I mean, my ideal is if someone sees something that I've designed and they think, oh, wonder why nobody's ever thought of that before. I mean, I got this idea when mixing two-stroke oil for my motocross bike, but it's actually quite difficult to measure out a liquid and see how much there is left in the container and understand how much you're pouring out unless you straighten it up. The other thing that we learned is that, you know, there was a lot of promotion about this new launch. You know, Nigella Lawson with Sebastian Conran, and John Lewis bought into it in a big way. And we noticed that as soon as they started selling it, they were selling, oh, the utensils would go in the utensil department, and the mixing bowls would go in the mixing department, and the tableware would go in the tableware department. But nowhere could the customer see all the products shown together as a collection as they were envisaged. So we pointed this out to John Lewis, and we made this little display stand, which they put in their stores. And sure enough, it affected, you know, people bought more of that range. And funnily enough, after Christmas, when we were expecting a dip in sales after the launch, sales increased. And this was because people were given the products for Christmas and then wanted to buy more. So this sort of launched me on a trajectory of doing an awful lot of kitchenware design. For about 10 years, I was two things. One is I was focusing a great deal on kitchenware, and the other thing, I was designing in collections rather than single products. So this was it changed the way I designed and the way that people thought about me and allowed me to build my business. Pretty soon, I got tired of designing things in polymers, although my early career has been spent, you know, designing coat hangers for Marks and Spencer's. And, you know, if you look in Marks and Spencer's and you look at a lady's knicker hanger and you think, God, they get through 30 million of those a year. And I designed that over 30 years ago. And you think about the tons of landfill that you might have created. It's quite a sobering thought. Anyway, so we created this timeless visual language for John Lewis, designed to last both culturally and materially, and we've tried to use sustainable materials and traditional materials like ceramic, wood, glass and steel. Because actually I looked in my own kitchen and, you know, I didn't really want anything out that was made of plastic. And like my father, I sort of subconsciously had an aversion to it. But we wanted all these products to be functionally innovative, so people wouldn't just buy them for what they looked like, but because of the way they worked. We wanted the products to appear in flea markets and not in landfill. And so this, over time, this evolved into a 200-piece collection for kitchen, tabletop, utilities, general homewares. And we would, this is an example of one of our trade fair stands. It's had a sort of chic utilitarian style of display, using scaffolding and pegboard as the key materials underpinning the brand ethos. We manned the stand with designers who'd worked on the designs, so that gave them some good insights and feedback in the way that buyers and people would react to their designs, because so often designers are sort of slightly cut off from their users, especially now that so much work is done on screen and using the internet. You know, a lot of people think research is just a case of, you know, looking at the world through Google goggles. But so we had a lovely launch in Manhattan, in West Elm, and this was a public launch of the brand. And you know, what's important is to have happy customers, because if you don't understand the retail environment where your products are being sold, the packaging that's being used, and the way that the products are successful, there will be no user experience. So it's very important you get a good customer experience, because no customer, no user. So more recently, about 5 years ago, I got a visit from the governor of the prefecture of Gifu, which is a mountainous area of Japan that's about 80% forested. And he commissioned us to work with his local makers because they were finding it difficult to export. So he thought that we could give them some insights on how to make their products better. So we applied our knowledge of designing to this, and started off with 20 traditional workshops to work with, and work together to produce a collection that could be marketed together. First thing we did was go to Japan, go and visit all the manufacturers and understand how things could be made and what the individual workshops could be done, and how things were different in Japan to Europe. I mean, the first thing you notice is that saw blades, the teeth go in a different way. And I guess if you've never invented a circular saw, you make your boards in a slightly different way too. I mean, they do have circular saws, but this is a traditional Japanese saw. And of course, steel was, I mean, when you've got mountainous forests, you have iron ore, you have a lot of water and a lot of wood for burning, creating charcoal. And you've got a lot of clay in the valleys for making ceramics. And one thing I'd always wanted to do was design a knife rack where you could actually see the blades without taking the blades out of the rack. The other thing is that, of course, as I said, Japanese people pull on the cut, whereas in Europe we tend to push on the cut. So it makes sense to make the taper on the knife handles go in a different direction. One of the makers was a traditional maker of paper lanterns, and this is a family-owned business that was going on for hundreds of years. And I was quite inspired by the similarity between the way they made them and my childhood hobby of making model aircraft. Oh, sorry, I've missed one out here. And yes, so this is what they ended up looking like. So what we did was to actually build in an exposed part of the structure, so as part of the light. And this made them look different and added value over a traditional paper lantern, which frankly you can buy in IKEA and Habitat and all sorts of places, and they'd become rather generic. So how could we add value to a wonderful handmade traditional paper product? And that was by adding narrative. And this idea of adding narrative to products is quite important. So for instance, here we're looking at a traditional Japanese raked garden, Zen garden. And so we use this pattern on the tableware, the crockery that we designed with them. And this is one of our CAD drawings that we sent out to them to show them what we wanted the products to look like. One of the manufacturers was using factory cut-offs, very small pieces of wood, to make what is known as Matsu Boxes. Originally, these were for measuring rice, for paying rural taxes to the urban side. The Matsu Boxes are more commonly now used for drinking sake with at ceremonial occasions. But there is a sort of limit to the market for little, rather nice looking, exquisitely made boxes. But what could we do that would enable them to export their product around the world? So using the constraints of their manufacturing and supply of scraps of wood with their signature finger jointed detail, we sought out the different products that we could make. So we started off sketching them pencil on paper. Then we made card models, or we sort of made the card models at the same time as the sketches. Then we have video conferences with Japan at a first thing in the morning, and then we would at a mutually convenient time, which is first thing in the morning for Japan. And then we would we would put the items into CAD and rough them out, send off our CAD to Japan. Once we were happy with the functionality, we'd share visuals with them via email, and then they would set about producing the first prototypes, which actually were terribly successful. And at the end of the project, the makers said, "God, we'd never thought we could make products like that. How exciting!" Anyway, so during the process of working with these makers, we made well over 1,000 iterative products, models, development models, and so there's a lot of craft and feeling the size and getting things right in the hand, as well as because so often now people can visualize on computers, they forget about scale and ergonomics. Funnily enough, one of the manufacturers was a furniture maker. When we showed him these designs inspired by the screens and panels you get in Japanese architecture, his first thought was, "Oh, goodness me, we thought you were going to give us European design, and these are very, very Japanese looking, aren't they?" And he liked them, but he thought they were very, very Japanese. And we responded by saying that Made in Japan was a really strong brand in itself. When you say to someone "made in Japan," they think of quality. And the other thing is that everything we made in Japan was, especially by hand, was by European standards very expensive, because we've been so spoilt by things being made, handmade, craft made by low-cost producers, be it China, Vietnam, or wherever, that when you get craftsmen in places like Japan being paid a reasonable middle-class wage, the on-cost to the customer is quite high. So we have to be able to justify it with the brand of "made in Japan" or whatever. I've been working in Japan actually since 1986. In 2003, in February, Nissan came to us. It turned out that Carlos Ghosn, you may have heard of, the CEO of Japan, lived in a Conran family furnished apartment in Tokyo. And he wanted us to apply our design thinking to the 2003 Nissan car show. So the only problem is that the Tokyo Motor Show, I should say, was in October. So we had to hurry up. So we applied a process of deplastification to what was, we got given a body shell, but we had to do the interior and all the other bits of it. So deplastification was the approach we applied for a simple design style, which may hark back to the first images I showed you, using natural feeling materials, but we had to use polymers because this had to be a producible car, but we used them in a way that they didn't seem plasticky. And I think that's the point. When I say deplastification, it doesn't don't use plastics. It's just make them nice and natural to feel. Leather being one, we use Conley leather in one of them. And we worked with Conley leather for over 25 years. And this is something we designed back in the day. And it's one of their best-selling and enduring products. And it's a toolkit. And it sells for £2,000. And you may think it's pretty absurd. Well, it probably would do to the B&Q customer to think a toolkit is selling for £2,000. But it's being sold in a luxury goods market alongside handbags costing, £3,000, and they've got nothing in them. And so we have a nice little line of designing sort of things for people who have got everything. And this appeared in Financial Times a couple of weeks ago. And so talking of, luxury end of the scale, one highlight project in my career was working on the passenger experience of the Concorde, designing the interior. And we used Conley leather there. And it was one of the most challenging spaces I've been involved with. It was so small. I mean, the loos were teeny. So to visualize it, if you think of an airport, the hurly-burly of the airport, the Concorde Lounge needed to be the lap of the gods. And so your experience of traveling Concorde started as soon as you arrived at the airport, and the way you were treated and the environment you're in to make you feel good about yourself. And there was a limit to how much you could do actually in the interior. There's a nice bit of Conley leather, but it had to be very Spartan, and everything was very light. And even the wine glasses were small because there wasn't a lot of stowage space. So we redesigned everything in this sort of slightly child-sized tableware. And one of the ideas we had was to make the cutlery out of titanium. And it was rather wonderful and very light, and people hated it because it wasn't heavy enough and it didn't have any heft. So we went back to using stainless steel. But anyway, there we are. Now, to give you an idea of relative values, if there's this little experiment here, usually I would ask people, to put their hand up and say how much they would pay for this rather nice 1 litre and ½ litre storage jar. And if you've got it in Harrods, well, it might be £50 for the pair. If I said John Lewis, you might think, oh, no, maybe more like 25. If I said it came from IKEA, you'll probably think 12. I mean, the ironic thing about this is that it was actually designed for Sainsbury's, but it was made in a factory in Spain, which is now defunct. And it was made for, and they supplied Harrods and they supplied John Lewis and IKEA. And that was somewhat of their undoing, actually. But they all made the same margin. It was just a question of economy of scale. IKEA would place an order for 1 million of these, whereas Harrods might place an order for a couple of hundred and John Lewis for a couple of thousand. So this makes you think, where does the money go? When you buy something in a store, where does the money go? And it's so different for all different products. So this is a very generic generalization of where the money might go in my experience. And so if you spent £100 on something, £40 of it would go to the retailer and the marketing effort. You think, God, if they're taking that kind of margin, why are they going bust left, right, and centre? Well, a lot of it goes in rent and rates, but actually, if you see a similar thing for online, you can see that it's a very different model that you're looking at. And you can make bigger margins all round. I mean, as I say, don't take this too literally, but it gives you an idea. You know, the costs of selling something online are so much cheaper than in a physical retail store. So this gets us on to why do people buy things? You know, the greatest driver of a purchase is value, and design creates value, value creates trade, trade creates wealth, and wealth creates culture. It's the way I see it, but you know, brand, as I see it, is design. I mean, value is brand, design, and quality divided by cost. And so we say value a perception of fair exchange, although I value my children, I don't have any intention of exchanging them. So if you look at brand, it's basically a perception or an expectation of performance based on reputation, experience, marketing effort, market position, and things like that. And then design breaks down into the emotional side of design and the rational side of design. The emotional side of design is based on basically the personality we give to products, their aesthetics, what they look like, how they feel in the hand, how they respond to fashions and the underlying trends and zeitgeist, how exclusive they are. You know, those Connolly leather tool bags would not generate that cost if they weren't sold in a very exclusive environment. And then there's the rational side of designing, which is about the functional behavior, the usefulness and innovation behind things and how easy they are to use. And then when I'm talking about quality, it's usually about manufacturing and service. You know, manufacturing quality drives performance. If you really understand how things are made, how things are fabricated, and the materials you're using, you can drive out costs and you can design in dependability and safety. So form definitely follows fabrication there. And then finally, we're talking about price. In the old days, when I started designing, it was all about price. But, you know, these days I buy things on Amazon and it's about convenience. It's not because it's cheaper. In fact, probably it's the same price as going down the high street, but it's there. It's a mouse click away. And there are huge issues now. Thankfully, people are questioning the sustainability of the products that they're buying and the moral issues behind the ethics and fair trade behind them. So when people make a purchase, it's very clear that some of it is quite subconscious and some of it is quite conscious. And so it's almost the needs versus the wants. And these aren't always in line with these things, you know. You may want a Ferrari, but actually, you know, a Volvo is better for taking the kids to school. This human decision-making was very well pointed out why it works by Daniel Kahneman in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Then we get on to what is the process we use to take away. So we're thinking about why do people want to buy things, and then we go to start to try and design them and work with a lot of academics. And of course, the nature of academic is you're exploring, you're interested, and you're just trying to prove something. And it's often quite a circular process, whereas designing tends to be much, much more linear. And when we look at all the different activities in creating a product, from the understanding it and agreeing what our objectives are and coming up with a big idea, turning that big idea into reality, and then testing it and then putting it into production, it all boils down to three basic phases: the scoping research, the design and development, and the production implementation. And the reason why I've said 46 weeks here is because typically in the past, a manufacturer would go to a trade fair, see a product, think, oh, there's a gap in my range. I'll find a designer and get him to design this product. So the process starts off with brainstorming ideas and thinking as radically as we can and having lots and lots of different ideas. Then we agree with one big idea, as we call the design concept, and explore the different ways of developing it. That's the blue bit in the middle. Then we'll agree then, yes, this is how we want it to be made. This is how it'll work. And these are the materials we want to use. Then we get on to the tough job of the production implementation. Now, I've shown this fairly linearly, but the concept ideas are the vital 5% of the 95% of the effort. But if you get the concept ideas wrong, the rest of the 95% of the effort is pretty futile. So it's important that to make this work well, that you have all the key players round the table at the same time. And I've broken these down very crudely into the people that are going to be selling the product, the people who are going to be creating the product, and the people who are going to be making the product. So you can see that I've broken it down into 5 basic stages here: the understanding and the scoping and writing the brief, coming up with a big idea, the conceptualization, the making that idea happen, the development, the testing the idea, validation, and putting the idea into production. Right. That sort of takes me to the end of my story here, but I'm quickly going to go through some products that I'm working on at the moment. So I started a robotics company 6 years ago called Consequential Robotics. And the thing is that we've had robotics around for over 200 years. The sewing machine is a first consumer-facing robotic device in the home. And we've had robots for over 50 years in manufacturing plants. We've had pick and place warehouse robots. These are ones we've designed with Ocado. And you can see the way they work is they go on a grid that's larger than several football pitches, and there's about 2,000 of these, and they pick up products from underneath and they move them around. So here's a pick and place warehouse, and they've got over 200 robots in here. Now, when you talk to people about robots, they immediately think of films that they've seen, usually dystopian films. But, you know, the idea of producing a humanoid robot, vaguely like Blade Runner, which was set in 2019, is beyond us. I mean, one of the reasons is to replicate a human brain in a computer will need to be about this size, and it would need the sea to cool it, and $1 billion worth of energy a year to keep it going. So that's pretty out of range at the moment. So if you produce something that looks like a humanoid, people are going to be disappointed, because if you make something look like a human and it can't do what a human does, can't even do what a human toddler does, you are going to be disappointed. However, if you produce something that looks a bit more like this, well, we don't have very high expectations of a kitten. All we really want a kitten to do is be very cuddly. So if we base our robot around a small mammal, and this is a start, because people won't expect too much from it, and we will be able to exceed expectations. So we call this thing a Miro. It's designed to be cute. It's the first time I've ever had a design brief that says cute in it. Usually they all say, oh, it must be an iconic design. but it's very highly featured. It's actually relatively low cost for a university robot platform. It's very emotionally engaging, and it's easy to understand form. People see it, they understand what it does and how to operate it. You operate it just like you do an ordinary animal, but you need to set it off. So it's tricky to imagine building something like this without polymers. It would be very difficult and extremely expensive. I can't think of how I possibly start making something like this. I suppose it'd be fabric, but then, you know, you're worried about hygiene and stuff with people touching it. So it's also injection molding is very good for repeated things. So it turns out, actually, it works very well in classes, because actually kids can get their heads around it. It takes away the otherwise rather abstract subject of coding. It gives it some context. And now that we have lockdown, the online Mirror Cloud coding platform works extremely well. And we've just launched a final version. I'd say we've just come out of beta on this last week. So it gives children in their homes the power to work on a full physics engine computer, and it doesn't really matter how powerful their laptop or device is, so long as they can get onto a browser. And then you think, actually, this could have a lot of pets are familiar and understood, and there are probably a lot of opportunities in therapy and social care where touch response easily, and an easily disinfected surface is going to be quite a bonus. So funnily enough, I mean, this is a market pull for us, because we've been approached by many therapists and hospitals to see if we can develop it for their use. And, you know, this is a typical use scenario, how something like this might work in a home. But there are many other ways, like, you know, where have I left my glasses, or things like that. You can imagine it in the future. It can't do this now, but it will do. So just to recap, yeah, the last 65 years have been a period of great change, not just for me physically, but communications. I mean, I can remember buying my first fax machine, and as a result, I was able to develop products in the Far East, the other side of the world, because I could send pictures, which you couldn't do over the phone or with telex or anything like that. So that was a big deal. Email, I can send better pictures and CAD files. Smartphone means I can work around the world and still be in contact. Video conference, here we are. So container shipping has made a huge impact on where things are made. You know, I'd still be working with UK-based pushchair makers if it weren't for container shipping. Single-use plastics, probably, you know, the packaging industry, and the fact that you can now get fresh food in your supermarkets is all down to single-use plastics. But, you know, the consequences of it were just working out. I mean, you know, they've barely been with us for 50 years, and they seem to be overtaking. Websites, internet has changed the way things are marketing. I mean, as I said, you know, I mean, I can remember the first supermarkets opening, and wow, you could help yourself. You didn't stand behind a counter. And online shopping, you know, now we're designing shops to be much more experiences, feel more like museums. Fashions are changing, and my business of product development is, you know, we've sped up. We're able to, you know, design collections of 200 products. The cost has gone down. Demand has increased because of the internet. And this has given us, and CAD has given us, huge amount of design freedom. I mean, think back, those pebble shapes, I wouldn't have been able to design. I've been able to think about it, but I wouldn't be able to specify it or visualize it. And 3D printing has recently made a huge difference. But all the time, we're thinking about the future and the materials we're using, not they're fit for use, but where they come from, how they're going to be used in their product and their eventual disposal. Can they be recycled? As I said, I prefer to be in a flea market than a landfill. So I hope that's okay. I was a little over time there, but there are probably no questions anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. You can imagine a bunch of people applauding virtually around the world. Let's go on to the Q&A, because I know there are questions. Will, are you there? Do you have the first question for Sebastian?
Yeah, we have some good questions. So first of all, we have a question from Peter, who thanks you for a fascinating talk, and he asks you, why do so many products still put design over functionality, especially in self-assembly products?
I wouldn't have thought they did. I mean, I always think about what something has to do. Form follows function, and form follows fabrication. And then form might follow fashion or feelings. But I suppose it's because, you know, we think quite subconsciously about the things we like, and our subconscious favors the soft benefits of how things looks like and their personality, whereas our rational conscience favors what they do and how well they're made. You know, I think probably that's the answer.
So actually, Peter also agreed with your dad about drinking coffee, but I mean, you also mentioned beer glasses, because I mean, everybody I know says that beer doesn't taste the same out of plastic glasses, but I don't think there's any scientific evidence for that. I mean, is that part of the same, we associate materials with different uses, and does that inhibit your ability to design things in a new and different and more sustainable way?
Well, we did a big exercise with beer glasses, home office sponsored exercise, because there's a huge number of people that end up in A&E due to accidents, inverted commas, with beer glasses. And, you know, in a beer drinking situation, often people get quite emotional and don't think about the consequences of crashing a beer glass into someone's face or something. So there was you know, how could we make beer glasses which couldn't be used as weapons, or you couldn't fall over on them, they couldn't have accidents. And we did a lot of tests using polymer beer glasses, but everyone said, oh, they're too plasticky. They don't have the heft of glass. They take away the flavor. I guarantee, you know, these people would not be able to tell the difference in flavor, especially after half a pint, let alone anymore. But there was that perception that, you know, plastic beer glasses weren't for real men, as it were. I mean, I don't want to gender stereotype here, but I think you get my drift.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Will, another question, please.
Okay, so we have a question here from Richard, who asks you about the tactile properties of materials, such as heft, warmth, texture, are clearly important for matching to design. How do scientists understand how the factors we play with in creating materials translate to the designer and the consumer?
I think a lot of it is going and seeing, you know, there's two things. You can measure the Met need by walking in stores and seeing what is being sold. If you go to a more expensive store, you will probably see what people want to buy, And if you go to Harrods, you'll see what people want to buy. And if you go to IKEA, you'll see what people can buy. And often you'll find that the cheaper stores aspire to the dreams in the more expensive stores. So that's just a start to tell you what people's current behavior is. Then there is, meeting the unmet need. People just assume that, the reason why we use plastic is because it is a fantastic material from a manufacturer's point of view. I mean, it's so much easier making a toothbrush out of injection molding it rather than carving it out of a piece of bone or ivory. So I guess that's a very simple illustration. But, this said, plastic doesn't feel natural and it doesn't age very well, I think is a big thing. So designing materials that age well and feel nice to the touch and have a certain heft to them. I mean, if we're designing knives with plastic handles, we put in metal weights inside the handles, often made out of factory scrap. So, when you're stamping the blades out, you stamp weights in the part of the strip that isn't going to be used for the blade, and you'll put that in the handle so that the handle will have a sense of balance and heft and feel right in the hand. And I think there's a lot of that feeling right in the hand. Logic would say that, lighter cutlery is better, but actually it just doesn't feel right. So it's the, dealing with the, I don't think so it's so much as the personal prejudice against plastic. I think it's that I don't, like the manufacturer who said, oh, plastics, it's all right for toys. It didn't occur to him until I showed him a ski boot that actually it could be used in a different way. I mean, I look at a ski boot and I don't think, oh, I prefer that to be made in leather. And people talk about ski boots and say, oh, I remember those dreadful leather things. So sometimes, a ski boot is a wonderful case of something that is so much better because it's made out of a polymer or a unnatural material. The other thing is that, I think plastics are always their best when they are true to themselves as well. So many times plastics are used to save money, and it really doesn't work well, and it fails. If you use nice, decent wall thicknesses and you slightly over-engineer your plastic components, they will have a better perception of value. But people try and trim their wall sections because it uses less materials and it speeds up the cycle time. But there we are.
Okay, Will, I think probably the last question since we're running out of time.
Okay. So final question. We've talked a bit about the sustainability aspects of materials for design. In your view, what is the biggest remaining gap in terms of the material properties in order to make these designs as sustainably as possible?
Well, I mean, what you can't get the genie back into the bottle with single-use packaging. It's going to be very, very difficult. Food packaging is, I would say, probably the biggest culprit of sustainability, and it's not because it's using plastic or it's using a fossil material, because frankly we've been using plant-based plastics, and that's not a problem. And it's better that a gallon of crude oil is made into plastic, which has a purpose, and then it's burnt as fuel, rather than it just being squandered as fuel as soon as it comes out of the ground. That's my view. I mean, it's better if we just leave it in the ground, is my absolute view. But the other thing is that if we can design a supply chain that just doesn't stop at the customer, but the supply chain goes on to the disposal supply chain, and we see it as one, you know, virtuous circle, rather than just the circle, you know. At the moment we've got a half circle that goes from manufacturer to customer, and then we don't have the rest of the circle that goes through disposal, recycling, composting, or however that we're going to recycle. It's all very well digging up a bit of Roman pottery that says Felix fecit, Felix facit on the bottom, made by Felix, by the way. But it's a very different thing if, you know, the Romans, we dug up Pompeii and it was just full of their old McDonald's packets and stuff. I'm not saying that there's anything particularly wrong with the way that McDonald's do it, but it's the culture we're in, the fast food culture. And we've had 50 years of it so far, and we haven't even had, you know, the Roman Empire was going for well over 500 years. So what's going to happen when we've got 10 times as much rubbish to deal with? And, you know, we've got to complete the chain.
Excellent, and a good point to the responsibility of us all. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you for the chemists that came along this afternoon to hear about design and really realize that actually the people like Sebastian are thinking about what materials they use, what chemicals they use. So that, and if any designers came along, yeah, you should. If we were live, you'd be talking to chemists afterwards, having a drink in the back of Belgrave Square. But so just think about it in cultural terms. So brilliant talk, Sebastian. Something for us all to think about as people who make or contribute to the supply chains. Thank you very much for coming. If you want to know more about the Society of Chemical Industry, there are a number of ways of contacting us. We're on all the known social media platforms. We probably even take letters if you want to write one to us. But thank you very much for coming. And with that, I'd like to thank Sebastian one more time and close the seminar. Thank you very much.